colleagues online, welcome. So, as you know, South Africa became a democratic state in 1994, but 29 years later, we are still experiencing huge economic disparities, which translate into structural difficulties in terms of health, in terms of housing, and social life, and so on. So the University of Cape Town itself has many policies and procedures that aim at dislodging the remnants of colonialism and apartheid. So with that in mind, today's conversation really goes a little bit deeper. It goes beyond policies, procedures, and codes of conduct. It really goes to the more insidious forms of oppression, the oppression that happens on a personal level and also at a relational level. My name is Undre Deglon from the Office for Inclusivity and Change. I'm going to be the program director for the day, and I'm now going to hand over to you, to the host of the conversation, our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Transformation, Student Affairs and Social Responsiveness, Professor Alalwani Ramagundlu, who is going to formally welcome you and position the conversation for today.
Many gadgets here, but that's technology for you. At least it's not paper everywhere. Welcome. It's a very cozy, intimate space. And I'm grateful that we have such an intimate gathering, because it means that we can ask brave questions, we can engage with courage. This is not to say that our colleagues who are joining us online are not to be thanked. Of course, we are grateful that you're joining in, and hope that Q&A will allow for those who are joining us online to also engage, but it's not the same. When you're in the same space and you can read bodily movements and look at people's facial expression, feel their temperature, it adds to the kind of engagements that can ensue. So, as Undre has said, this is a conversation. It is really part of what we launched last year, the UCT Conversation Series. So we launched the UCT Conversation Series last year, starting with a focus on anti-racism. Why anti-racism? Sure, it's an important question. I hope you have asked yourself that question. Why anti-racism? Why not non-racialism? And do want to make it very clear why we felt it was important to focus on anti-racism. Non-racialism is a beautiful ideal. It's a stunning ideal. But to be a non-racial society takes work. Indeed, it should be that all of us, here and beyond, and by here and beyond, I mean South Africa, the continent, and the rest of the world, strive for a non-racial society. But it would be a devastating lie to suggest that we are already there. It takes work to get there. And anti-racism is the work for now, for today, for every day, until we get to what we can say is a non-racial society. Anti-racism makes very clear and poignant that what we should see around us and everywhere is representativity. as a start, and diversity. So representativity is about human beings. It's about human beings seeing others like themselves thrive in every space. When other categories of human beings are not in the spaces we find ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, why so? We also need to be very aware that those who look up to us, when they don't see themselves in who they are, there is no hope that they can see themselves taking up such positions. Me too, I can be that. It's an important source for hope, especially for our young ones. So if we care about our society, if we care about the world, we should know that all our young people should be hopeful about their future. And a non-racial society allows that, but only following the work of anti-racism that we have done. I'm sure you recall when we had the first president after the 1994 elections, and it was a black person for the first time in this country. Me too, I can be that. Gave hope to all black people in the country. We also know that that Me Too has not extended to black women. Yet they're the majority in the country. You see how representativity or lack thereof shows us the unfinished work of anti-racism. Now, diversity is the other important aspect why we must do anti-racism work. There can be no excellence without diversity. Forget it. It's not going to happen. Same demographics, in the same room, same organization, narrow understanding of the rest of the world. It's as simple as that. Diversity is not just a nice thing. It is key for excellence. When you have diverse individuals with diverse stories, diverse backgrounds, we expand our world, we expand our knowledge. It creates a rich space for contestation of ideas. When we only have those that look ourselves around us, excellence is nowhere. Decolonial scholarship is an area where many of us would like to say, as a university, we are thriving, that the world looks at us as a highly ranked university, as a place where decolonial scholarship is thriving. How do we know whether we indeed are growing decolonial scholarship in our context when certain bodies remain absent? Today, you have a rare opportunity to engage some of those individuals that are in our midst at the University of Cape Town who are doing decolonial work and are an embodiment of what it means to be a human being in context who is connected to communities in our context, who represent those who are the majority in society, but a minority at UCT. It's a real pleasure for me to have these two colleagues here present today. And the first colleague that will engage us is, must make sure that I have the order correct. So excited to listen to both of you that it really doesn't matter who speaks first. And this is not about seniority or juniority, right? There's such a word as seniority. I just made it up. You would have seen the biographies of our two colleagues in the invitation that went out, but I just felt it would be a disservice not to read them out. It just felt nice when I was looking at the biographies. I couldn't miss the opportunity to read out their biographies. But I'll start with our first presenter, Dr. Zamambo Mkhize. She's a lecturer here at UCT in Gender Studies at the African Gender Institute. She did her undergraduate degree at Florida A&M University on a full tennis scholarship. Yes, you heard right. She's an avid tennis player. Before undertaking her honors in criminology and masters in gender studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Zamambo did part of her PhD in Pennsylvania as a Fulbright scholar, and she did her postdoctoral fellowship at the Center for Critical Research on Race and Identity at UKZN. Zamambo's research focuses on modern polygyny, law, family, Zulu culture, African feminism, among other focus areas. She just published her first book titled Polygyny and Gender, released in September 2021 by the University of KwaZulu-Natal Press. Zamambo's other research focus, also on African women, is in high-stakes degrees such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, otherwise called STEM, or abbreviated as STEM, and has written numerous articles around this topic. She has another publication to be released later this year. She founded the African Feminist Foundation, which is dedicated to supporting, mentoring, and advancing African women in the STEM fields. She's an activist, academic, and, as I said, a sports woman.
Thank you, Professor Ilerwane, and the OIC for inviting me to be a speaker. And good morning, everyone. I'm very nervous. So my research is in higher education in South Africa, specifically focused on African women in STEM disciplines. So my talk will be titled, They Are Women, What Do They Know? And that will become clear as I conclude as to why that title. I'll discuss 4 issues. What do higher education institutions mean when they say they want transformation? What is genuine transformation and what does it look like? What must be done about institutions, departments that outwardly present and are perceived to be progressive and transformed, but within them is a deep-rooted racism, sexism, and misogyny that is perpetuated. And finally, the system for African women is rigged, and how do we unrig it? So what do institutions mean when they say they want transformation? What is transformation? We have all heard the term and have a broad understanding about what it means. Transformation means different things to different people. In higher education, transformation is contextual. Historically, Black universities need to be more gender transformative, whereas historically white universities face racial and gender inequalities. But what is occurring is reform. Reform is having a large number of still disadvantaged groups within an institution. Transformation entails moving beyond just reforming the system and towards allowing those still denied groups sincere representation in the upper echelons of power in higher education institutions, as well as reconfiguring the system towards social justice for all people. The effects of democracy are such that universities remain a microcosm of society, which is still untransformed. In universities, transformation and liberal ideology are connected. Neoliberalism and neocolonialism exist in academia, and the norm is whiteness. In a country where the overwhelming majority is African, and within that, African women, it is concerning that African women remain grossly underrepresented in senior management positions in all spheres of the economy, especially in higher education. STEM education and careers were designed to attract white, heterosexual, middle to upper class, Christian, able-bodied men. This highlights how the ontology and epistemology are constructed, and the belief that the innateness of STEM abilities is solely for white people or white males. So how do disciplines that are predicated on the ideology enact transformation? The short answer is that they do not. Instead, they implement reform and then proclaim its transformation. So it's important to understand that historically, higher education was never designed to educate the African majority. So why, based on that foundation, would higher education want to sincerely include Africans? As Professor Mboti stated, apartheid was colonization on steroids. It was and is never the same thing. It changes, mutates, and adapts to hide itself better. Reform is disguised as transformation when it's not transformation. And it's done to distract the critics who want to dismantle the system, when all the system wants to do is remain and metamorphose without relinquishing any power. A mass number of African students does not equate to transformation, but a change in structural configuration is necessary for real transformation to occur. The system exists to erase Blackness. It does not welcome it, it does not see it, and consequently, Africans must assimilate into the existing system. The systematic structures and barriers African students face are colonial constructions that persist today and show that the white power will not relent and will push back constantly. Reform can either lead to transformation or be a catalyst to a backlash, as previous student movements such as #RoseMustFall and #FeesMustFall have shown us. So what is genuine transformation? What does that look like? To universities, transformation looks like having some African people within institutions that used to be white only. Institutions and STEM departments have a mass number of still disadvantaged people within their discipline. They proclaim to be transformed or are transforming. They believe transformation is actively perpetuating the narrative of STEM being colorblind and that racism and sexism no longer exists and African students succeed or fail based on their own strength of character, intelligence, resilience, and just sheer grit. This ideology is particularly insidious because it perpetuates the idea that it's rude to recognize a Black person's race or culture. This ideology works in conjunction with the neoliberal ideology of meritocracy along 3 lines. First, it refuses to acknowledge that racism and sexism are real issues in current higher education. The second, it fails to recognize how institutional inequality continues to bestow unearned advantages to the white people. This denial allows the dominant ideology to locate racism today in a few prejudiced individuals. Third, it fits with the framing of the lower achievement by African students as due to their biological and cultural deficiency, which essentially blames African students for their lower status and perpetuates the historical STEM ideology of Africans being inferior intellectually, culturally, socially, and biologically to whites. It also shows an unwillingness to question how institutions continue to benefit whites, coupled with statistics showing the lower achievement scores for Africans, and therefore shifts the blame to African students, their families, their communities, and their culture, and away from whiteness. The ideology works with tokenism and the academic rhetoric that is protracted that resilience is the key to success and career achievement in STEM. This untruth then dismisses the invisible forms of racism, such as structural and institutional racism, which are the impenetrable barriers to African students thriving and succeeding in STEM fields. So when departments and institutions claim they want to transform, what they're saying is they want to reform, but are only invested to ensure that the system is rigged and remains rigged for the dominant white people in STEM. Transformation is more than just demographic transformation. It's more nuanced and complicated. There are individuals who belong to the dominant culture, white people, at universities, yet have and continue to do more to push the transformation agenda forward. On the other hand, there are individuals who are deemed transformative representations based on their race and or gender, but work tirelessly to sabotage and obstruct transformation agenda. So genuine transformation is structural processes and procedures, and it ideally should be based on individual track records of what one has done for transformation or against transformation. So then what do you do about racism and sexism that occurs within systems and institutions and organizations that outwardly present themselves as transformed and progressive, but are the opposite of that? In my research, I have found that within these high-stakes fields such as STEM, there exists a deep-rooted group racism, sexism, and misogyny. African students have experienced the worst form of discrimination from people who, under the South African racial categories, are classified as Black. This type of action highlights how white supremacy and racism has been internalized by some Black people in authority. Scholars such as Fernand and Ferrer have theorized about the notion of the colonized mentality when the oppressed Black people aspire to be like their oppressors, the white people, by imitating their ideological beliefs and following their racist educational guidelines. These scholars have pondered the question of how to deal with people who are oppressed, also oppressing their own. The conundrum of consciousness and reflexivity in which individuals prevent other individuals from progressing further in the educational inquiry is an act of violence, an act of self-violence that Ferrer alludes to. So this highlighted the Herculean efforts African women in STEM specifically face and must overcome the enormous battles of racism, sexism, and classism that begins in high school and continues to university, where they face the same persecutions from every race and gender as they advance and progress in South African universities. Now, pertaining to the question I asked earlier about what happens when certain individuals are deemed transformative based on their race or gender, or institutions, departments, or organizations that proclaim to be for Black people and have a perception of being inclusive and welcoming to everyone. But within those departments and institutions and organizations, there are individuals in those positions of authorities whose ideologies are not aligned with the transformation agenda. There are Black people who are working tirelessly against the transformation agenda, and they hide in plain sight. This goes beyond the individual characteristic flaws of being racist and sexist, but lies within the leaders within the institutions who protect such individuals in those positions, which makes them also complicit in their behavior. As my research has highlighted, African women in STEM experience all sorts of discrimination, racism, sexism, and xenophobia throughout their academic careers, as students to faculty. They have these experiences as students from other students and as staff from other staff. The STEM departments and institutions, attitudes and inaction have implicit departmental and institutional support. Thus, it's not surprising that the neutrality, colorblind, meritocratic, and toxic levels of prejudice remain unchallenged in STEM disciplines, because other races have the implicit protection of the institution and STEM departments that allow racism and sexist individuals to badger African women unchecked. Universities and STEM departments need to have more specific policies that prevent and deal with racist and sexist incidents that occur to African women in STEM. By institutions and STEM departments, inactions to such cases of racial harassment and bullying faced by African women show they are in effect condoning and hiding or normalizing such behaviors and occurrences. The university and STEM departments' inactions, lack of serious sanctions or consequences for perpetrators, and lack of clear guidelines for reporting highlights how untransformed these disciplines remain. The universities and STEM departments fail to be proactive to prevent such abuses from occurring is a violation of trust and expectations of the African women in these disciplines to receive systemic protection. This once again highlights how STEM spaces are hostile to African women, because if STEM disciplines were truly transformed, none of these students and staff would feel emboldened to continue to oppress African women. So then, how do we unrig the system? The SARS-CoV pandemic demonstrated that radical solutions are possible and that the world, if necessary, can stop and make a conscious shift and come to a standstill to deal with a problem. Racism and sexism in higher education are structural and systemic issues which are exacerbated in the STEM disciplines and will continue to be a problem for generations to come unless a radical and focused solution is found. The question of why can we not stop the world to deal with systemic issues? Is it because African problems are not an existential problem, so life goes on? COVID-19 is an existential problem, and African problems are not. African people have been living with their problems and their oppression for 400 years, so why must it change? The way to find new radical solutions to these problems will occur when the educational system begins to treat the African child as a national disaster. The African condition is a disaster, and it is a state of emergency at all times. The mere fact that African people post-1994 continue to face the same systemic and structural issues and cannot attain substantial upward mobility and attain good outcomes is because the system is rigged. African people are the overwhelming majority population, with over 80% in South Africa, and yet they only have bad outcomes and continue to be plagued by poverty, disease, and are uneducated. White people are the minority with a little over 11% of the population, and yet they have good outcomes, such as an overwhelming ownership of land, companies, high education qualifications, majority stakeholders in JSE companies, and wealth in the country. A country with an overwhelming majority of one race, that country needs to have those people in leadership position. The mere fact that they are not, that the African population is not, is a sign that the system is rigged and continues to be rigged. The white minority continues to take everything, own everything, and keep African people as laborers. If the system was fair, the outcomes would show that majority population would have the majority of good outcomes. This is clear example showing that the system is rigged purposely, systematically, and foundationally, and is rooted in white neoliberal capitalist machines. Power that resides in higher education, specifically in STEM fields, will not concede anything without demand and usually a fight for structural change and for dismantling and rebuilding of institutions. Discriminatory structural barriers in STEM obstruct the ability to cultivate talent, which is directly tied to understanding ways to promote the full inclusion of excellence across the racial spectrum. STEM disciplines must examine their existing diversity models and evaluate how well they are actually working. There needs to be diversity or bias training and development. Additionally, besides the training related to instilling anti-racist practices in their research, advising, and teaching, STEM graduate programs should evaluate how their human resources system, which are tools for the STEM socializations, perpetuate diversity models that actually decrease the number of Black students in their organizations. One step is committing to difficult conversations about how African students experience their departments and what they need to feel included, visible, supported, nurtured, and encouraged to succeed. Lecturers and professors need to be aware of their own internal and subconscious biases and address them adequately in order not to replicate them and repeat them, because STEM students are susceptible to those unconscious biases. The need for faculty development activities and resources aimed at preparing STEM faculty for the management and leadership roles they play when running research labs, particularly as they relate to faculty awareness of their own social identities and those of their students. To hold faculty accountable for equitable mentoring practices such as expectations, and also to hold and build into a larger reward structure for faculty. Additionally, program administrators and university-level graduate student support should provide resources for students who are experiencing hostility within advising relationships and opportunities to confidentially report hostile lab environments and protection for students who choose to access these resources. STEM departments should consider how the colorblind liberalism operates in their departments, focusing on areas such as distribution of resources to faculty and students, pedagogy, and policies affecting recruitment, administration, hiring, and retention. Universities need to work with individual STEM departments to develop and extend and sustain equity-centered practices. They must also develop an action plan that deals with racialized experiences of students, faculty, and staff in those departments. All leaders in the STEM department should work to increase their cultural competency and use their learning to inform programs, initiatives, and decisions. A STEM department should have proactive bias response plan to address both individual and institutional biases. Leaders should then be audited departmental and administrative units to track and measure progress towards minimizing their bias in their operations. So to conclude, we need to transcend talking about transformation and just do it. We cannot continue to use demographic numbers to conceal that the white minority in South Africa continue to hold significant power in all social, economic, educational landscapes and will not relinquish it. We need to find new solutions to the same old 400-year-old problems. My suggested solutions or current solutions only strengthen the problem instead of ending it. If we're unable to declare these problems faced by African women in STEM in South African higher education as a state of disaster and find radical solutions for them, we cannot end the problem. Oppression and discrimination of Africans was a process which began with colonization, was legalized by apartheid, and is strengthened by neoliberalism. In my research, I have talked about the causes of all oppressions for African people in advancing in higher education in STEM. The racist, sexist, now classist discrimination that persists and evolves to disguise itself. What now is needed is a radical solution to the same problems we have theorized and tried to find solutions to with little to no success. As my title of my talk says, they are just women, what do they know? These African women acknowledge white privilege will never accept them, but they should respect them as humans, as Africans, as African women who not only belong here as their birthright of being Africans born on the African continent, but they want the same thing, which is contribute their knowledge and expertise in the STEM field in order to find sustainable African solutions for uniquely African problems. But then again, they are just women. What do they know? Thank you.
Colleagues, please join me again in thanking Zama. We promised that this was a much needed conversation to be had, and as you can hear. So now I'm going to take some questions. Before I go to taking some questions from colleagues in the room and also online, I'm just going to reflect on an article written by Kezi, Marx, and Ramakundo, 2020, which also speaks about decolonizing African studies. And in that article, they delineated how decolonization should happen at a personal level, at a relational level, at an epistemic level, and at a structural level. So I think maybe we can also then categorize our questions in terms of the personal, the relations, the relational, the epistemic, and the structural. So now I'm going to take the questions from the colleagues online. So Anne, you're going to manage that. So let's move then to questions for Samambo from the floor. Any questions?
Yes. Hi, well, thanks so much, Doc, for your presentation, the research, which is really opening up the dearth of work that we have to do from an anti-racism ethos and approach. The one question I have is, in the research and the article that was shared with us, you write about DHET reviewing Zandile's marks, was questioning why she, from the principle of race, why were these marks the way they were? And my question to you is, what guidance would you give to us as a university in changing processes at a national level? For example, with DHET. Can I answer that?
Any other questions? Maybe we'll take 3 at a time and then. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Tando Tsotsobe. I'm the advisor to the Vice Chancellor. I just wish to invite a comment from you, and I was also engaged by the introductory remarks or opening remarks by Elelwane. Recognizing that in South Africa since 1994, and of course you can date back to the breakaway by the PAC from the ANC, and this whole concept of non-racialism. It would seem to me, and I'll be the first Damascus experience, so to speak, that the anti-racism has never been infused as a vehicle to arrive at a non-racial society, but being retained and introduced as means to heal a racialized society. So I find myself in 2023 where non-racialism, of course, is expressed as an aspirational constitutional directive, so to speak. But the engines to get there have been seen in relation to legislations like the affirmative actions, who will recognize affirmative action and so on and so on. Right? But and the critics have always raised and lowered the bar of reverse racism. Almost as we navigate non-racialism, you are constantly don't gravitate towards being perpetuating a reverse racism. Now, the concept of anti-racism, which is where my question is actually now, has been packaged or being, at least at UCT in my view, including, is seen as, if we don't honestly engage in anti-racism project, we might not get there into a non-racial society. How do you then respond to those who may raise a red flag that says this is actually reverse racism? Do you understand? If I'm making sense. Yes.
Thank you, Tando.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Doc, for the presentation. I would just perhaps like to, I'm Cecil Peters, the Employment Equity Manager at the university. And I was quite interested in the discussion we had about, the numbers and complying with what's required in terms of legislation in our country. My question really relates to, and you also spoke about human resource policies, recruitment selection, etc., etc. Now, as a university or as higher education, how do we navigate or find a way around where some disciplines might use the excuse we can't transform or reform because in this discipline you can't find African scholars, for example, and that becomes a challenge because now you need to be a compliant employer, you need to report, but also you sit with the catch-22 where you can't find certain scholars based on a selection committee's opinion that they can't find these scholars. How do we navigate our way around that as, as our education plans going forward?
Thank you very much, Cyan, Tando, and Cecil for those questions. Dr. Mkhize?
Cyan.
Cyan has picked up questions online.
Oh, can
I will that as well.
Thank you. Three
Three.
is the whole number. These are all Cyan, to your question that you asked about Zandile, so for those who haven't read the article, Zandile was a student who went to a township school, and she got a distinction in higher grade mathematics for her matric results. And as a result of that, the educational department withheld her matric certificate, because they wanted to investigate. They believed it was cheating, because never has a black anybody got it past higher grade mathematics, let alone with an A. So of course, that was the mentality that the student has cheated and the teacher helped her cheat. So that's what Zandile's context is. So then it was actually an entire year that she had actually gotten a scholarship to go to university and pursue mathematics, but couldn't because they held it for a year. And after, they've done the investigation, they realized she didn't cheat. She's always been getting A's since grade 8, and when she came to university, she actually decided maybe I shouldn't pursue mathematics because they already don't believe that a black person can be pursuing mathematics. And now she actually graduated a PhD in mathematics last year. PhD in mathematics. Yeah. So what do you do in that situation? Because you have a department that's run by black people, and instead of celebrating a black student from a township school having achieved something amazing as passing higher grade mathematics with the distinction, they are instead vilified. So the mentality is they do not see and cannot comprehend a black person having the ability, the innateness to understand mathematics and pass it well. So what do you do with those people? I mean, these are black people. We can't even say these are white people, it's expected, but these are actually black people. What do you do about that? And the short answer is, I don't know. Because these people are supposed to be pushing transformation, encouraging black people to be in STEM, and they're black people who achieve well in STEM, but then they're discouraged because they're not believed to be authentically gifted essentially in science or mathematics or anything. So what they're actually doing is the reverse. Instead of encouraging, they're discouraging, because it's sort of, I can achieve all these things, but my marks will be, doubted. Exactly what they're saying. Because the fact that so much has happened through African over 400 years, and yet you get to a point where you recognize that it's wrong, and now you're trying to rectify it, and you as a dominant minority who has generational everything supporting you, you get to a point where now there's affirmative action, nowadays versus racism. That to me shows that you see anything was wrong from the beginning.
because in our system is we're trying to rectify a past wrong. And for you to say that that is wrong, says a lot about what you actually thought was wrong.
Careful. Quick follow-up.
Yes. You have the advantage of being in the room.
Conversation.
No, I believe very strongly that the concept of anti-racism in South African society is a vehicle to get into to this non-racial society. It's either it's been suppressed, it's almost a new a realization, or in fact, I don't quite think it has occupied at least the dominant or the ruling class, so to speak. It's I've not seen it as a national agenda, right? And the reason why I also say this is because it's almost much later in South African society beginning to legislate response to racial tendencies, whether it's, to in a way, the non-racialism itself was just seen as a bandage to heal the wounds of apartheid. Nowhere did we get, as a society, to say, no, actually, non-racialism is where we are going, instead of using it to respond to the wounds. If I'm making sense.
I think that was doesn't require a response. Supplementing. I'm just going to quickly go to the questions by our colleagues online. So the first question is being posed by Simlikiwe. Dr. Mkhize, my question is decolonizing historically white universities possible in this lifetime, given the status quo around deep racial politics and privilege inequalities? And a follow-up question.
You want me to respond to that one?
You first want to respond to that.
Thank you for that question, Sim. I believe she's one of my students. Very good student. So I don't know. I don't think it's possible in this lifetime. I think we still have a lot of work to do. But it's hopeful. There's hope. But I honestly don't think, well, perhaps let me speak for myself, not in my lifetime. Let me say that I do not think that.
May I also sneak in? Yes. See, that's the benefit of being the program director. Sharon Stein also writes about the house that modernity built. And she asks, are we, who are the residents of the house, are we the right people to dismantle the house? Or are we merely renovating the bathroom and the bath? So I'm then going to go to Cindy's next question before I come to you.
I just wanted to say something about what you said. And we've talked about this in class that Sim is in that in terms of representation, and this was Prof. Ilon was saying, is that my being here as being a representative and a role model to people who look like me might not change anything substantially. But someone might who looks like me and say, one day I might be her or better than her. That's great. But to me, I honestly believe these things are incremental. So even though my being here, it doesn't have substantial change, it's all my beings here over years or decades will have bigger change for the bigger picture, if I'm making sense. And I know I use this example is that Einstein is known as the genius that he was today, but he was able to get there because of other people who came before him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's how I see transformation specifically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then there's the last follow-up question. How important is it to address economic inequalities before we address anti-racial issues?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yes, economic inequalities, right? Before racial issues. I would think in a way they are connected in a way, because if you have a racist issue, therefore you can't really access and advance economically. So in a way, it's sort of it's not so much addressing the economic. Of course, we have to address the economic poverty. That is a serious issue, but we also have to address the racist issue, because it's still overwhelming one race that's still the poverty, dealing with a lot of poverty, and the other one is not, who are the majority of the country. So I think in a way it's a connected.
They're interconnected. Then Teresa, please.
Thank you, Prof. Delawani said it's good to have people in the room because you can read their temperatures. Well, I don't know if you can read my stomach. No, not. So there are two things I want to say. The one point that hit me from what you spoke about was that transformation is so nuanced, and those are for and against. And you pointed to the violence, and I think we focus around sexual harassment and bullying, but we don't focus on the microaggressions and the emotional trauma people experience. And I think that for me, that's become like the light bulb that's gone on in the last few years. I'm very thankful for 2015. I think 1994 did mark a change, maybe in government and some representation. But what the students did in 2015, if academics didn't wake up then, they'll never wake up.
Yeah.
What depresses me, and I've actually lost hope, so I'm glad that you say there's still hope, because this year I've lost hope. I've been at UCT for 26 years. We have protests every February around fee debts. I was going to use a word I can't use in public. If students present to council proposals to address fee debt, why are they ignored? Like they are black, I'm assuming they're black African students. I don't know who the students are on council, but I know one of the students who's on the institutional forum. If the institutional forum is asked to engage in these issues and they don't, like, I don't know, we're supposed to be the academic leaders. Well, that's where I lose hope for South Africa. If we can't actually address this fee debt. Currently, I have a disabled student who has got a scholarship from MasterCard Foundation who can't clear his fee debt. I have 21 higher certificate students who are trying to work as community workers within the health and social system and can't clear their fee debts. Like, I'm going to name people. Shire will help to look at how we get rid of their interest. Tracy Naledi suggested we talk to, I'm giving a specific example because I don't want to talk generalities. Talk to Jackie and Shawco to see if the Dell Foundation, so we give them computers generously during COVID, but now they're stuck with 7,000 or 8,000 on their fees to pay. Like, to me, it just does not make sense. So maybe we'll clear 10,000, 11,000 of their debt. Their fees were 29,000. They've still got the 29,000 to pay. But we've shown this higher certificate is an economic boost for the students. They're sometimes the first people in their families. They can get jobs. We've got people who, because they're studying, their children see that they're coming to university and can study. And so they, like it's happened to the children of people who have come in, are going to university. But we've got 21 students because the money from the health and welfare CETA went into COVID relief. They can't get money. They didn't apply for NSFAS the right way. So they can't get, like, surely there must be, it's 500,000 we need. So for me, if we don't address the economics, we're not going to change. If we don't listen to the Black African people who are giving the answers, because I think that I've worked with Black disabled women. I'm telling you, I don't know how they survive on the budgets that they do, their household budget, because I don't know that I could. And they do, and they raise families on it. So like that for me is the transformation we need. That's the new knowledge we need to generate.
Thank you
Sorry,
so
I didn't
much.
think I'd get so emotional.
Thank you,
Just
Teresa.
you're sitting with me.
I think it is about the economic, right?
Yeah.
It is about the economic.
We need serious structural change at this university. Change the policies, change the systems. Don't tick boxes. Oh, and one other thing, the Senate gives the employment equity thing. 3 faculties tell me that they can't disaggregate for disability on their employment equity. Why? Because it's so difficult. You've got a disability academic program, disability studies academic program. You've got the person who worked in developing the census questions, who was here at this university. Margie Schneider could walk in and help any faculty collect the data to disaggregate for disability. And academics say it's too difficult.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for those insights. And then one last insight from online. Dr. Mkhize, we define decolonization as a process, not as an outcome. We will never truly reach a decolonized society. We have to be constantly self-reflexive, constantly changing, constantly rethinking, thinking itself. And that is the beauty of it all. Colleagues, I'm going to pause here for Dr. Mkhize's presentation and her questions, because I'd like for us to please just take a 10-minute comfort break, be kind to ourselves, and also to give our sign language interpreter, Michelle the Brain, an opportunity to get a glass of water. So, colleagues, we'll be back at 10 past 10.
Thank you.
And well done for having a sign language interpreter from the beginning.
talking too much. For those who have just joined us, welcome. Then we're going to resume. I'm now going to hand over again to DVC Alawani, and she will be introducing our next speaker, Professor Salome Maswine.
Yes. Thank you again, Ingrid, and it's been lovely to be acquainted with you, Michelle. She's new, so really great to have her. Very tempting to already start making reflection remarks, especially that last point about, fee debt and how much a university on its own can take on, and what we need to take to the state to respond appropriately. But we'll get there. It's my great pleasure to be introducing our next speaker, Professor Salome Maswine. Like Dr. Zamambo Mkize, a lot in the bio. And of course, now we're talking about a professor.
Yes.
There's something about being a professor at UCT and whom you represent. That really is almost the elephant in the room. But perhaps we'll get there when we have further reflections. Professor Salome Maswine is not only full professor, but she's also head of the Global Surgery Division at UCT and an obstetrician. This acronym of obs and gynae, we just want to take a short left. Obstetrician and gynecologist.
Yes.
She's a World Economic Forum Young Scientist, a member of the Academy of Science South Africa, and the next Einstein Fellow. She's the Vice President of the Women in Global Health South Africa and President of the South African Clinician Scientist Society and board member and chair of research of the Health Systems Trust in South Africa, a Global Council member of Lifebox, a board member of FALF and SHOCO, and a member of the FIGO Committee on Ethical Aspects of Human Reproduction. After specializing, she completed her Master's in Medicine and PhD in obstetrics and gynecology. She did a postdoc fellowship at the Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. She has a diploma in project management and a certificate in leading organizations and change from MIT, and completed the Young Physician Leaders program with ESMT Graduate Business School in Berlin. She's a section editor of the PLOS Global Public Health Journal. She has received numerous awards for her research contribution to maternal health, including the Trailblazer and Young Achiever Award by the President of South Africa in 2017. In 2020, she was listed in the Mail and Guardian's 50 Most Powerful Women in South Africa. In 2021, she was named among 20 Young Shapers of the Future in Health and Medicine by Encyclopedia Britannica. And in 2022, won the Dumani Cora Prize for Research Excellence. Over to you.
Greetings, and thank you so much for this prestigious invitation. Such a great honor to be invited to share and to speak. This is my title slide, as you can see, but this is the real title slide. And, we'll talk about the elephant in the room. I think two things. Firstly, to say, as you heard, I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. My PhD is in obstetrics and gynecology, not on race and racism. So I speak here as one who's in a field that looks at equity, access to healthcare, and I'm really going to talk about the social determinants of health as one who's experienced in that, but not as one who's experienced in race and racism as an academic discipline. And then the other elephant in the room is, we try to shy away from topics around race because they can be divisive. A conversation like this, you either feel like a victim or a perpetrator, or you feel very neutral, and that feels worse than being on either side. And that's not my intention. I think those of us who are here because we have a vested interest in equity, and you don't have to be Black to push for equity and to break down, the legacy of inequity and racism. So applauding those of you who have braved this conversation and saying that I want to really have a conversation around this and continue this conversation, but with those who I believe have got a vested interest in improving things. So I'll talk about the determinants of health as I said, and I think many of you, if you look at this picture, may not immediately imagine, before we go into race, but you're not going to imagine an old white South African man living in this building, I don't know, unless, but I think that doesn't automatically come to mind. You may not imagine an Indian woman living in this house, but if I said to you, I grew up here, you'll believe me, right? But I didn't. So already as a Black woman, when you see me, a lot of people have got preconceived ideas around the lack of privilege that I may have had in my life. I remember meeting a man in a restaurant and telling him, I'm a doctor, obstetrician, I'm completing my PhD. And he said to me, you've done so well considering where you come from. And I said, do you know that I actually spent the first 4 years of my life in the United States and probably maybe had more privilege than you, So I'm not saying this to brag. No, I'm not. I'm saying it to say we've got preconceived ideas about where people come from, and we assume that certain people have struggled and have broken so many barriers, and we put people in boxes based on how they look and what we think their experiences are. So when I go into an interview, for example, someone has decided before I even speak, is this a competent Black woman or she's incompetent? Or more importantly, I think in an institution that is trying to reform and not transform, or, I also learned something very new, or am I the equity candidate? Before I speak, you've concluded I'm not good enough, but someone has to give me this job because we need to balance out numbers. So I just want to put it all out there before we talk about the topic for the day so that we can deal with our own biases right here, right now. So determinants of health, as I said, the definition that was proposed in 1986 by the Ottawa Charter, health is created and lived by people within the settings of their everyday life, where they learn, work, play, and love. I love this definition or this statement because it tells you that where we live influences the type of health, the type of diseases that we have, the type of injuries that we have, our access to healthcare, how we experience health and diseases and the quality of our healthcare. Again, someone who has an eclamptic fit or any type of seizure in this environment, we all know, they might die before they get to the nearest hospital. And even if they get to that hospital, it might just be a district hospital providing primary services, and they might die being referred 400 kilometers to get to the hospital where they will get access to the actual care that they need. So I've given this map. This is on surgery, access to surgery in the world. The darker colors, as always, sub-Saharan Africa, we've got the worst outcomes, we've got the worst access, we've got the fewest number of doctors, specialists, etc. And this is important because, again, people that are living there are African, mainly Black. I also try not to speak about race purely from a Black-white perspective. I've had the privilege of living in many provinces and in many parts of the world where the racism is not Black-white. The racism may be Indian Black, it may be, Chinese Black, or it may be, not even Black, in places where there were just not enough Black people. And I live in Boston, I lived in Boston, and Trevor Noah had this joke to say, Boston is the most racist place in America. And like everyone said, but there's no racism. We don't experience racism. He said, they've taken out all the Blacks, so there are just no Black people that actually experience, there's a systematic remove, certain people that all look like one another. And you won't even experience discrimination because systematically you've been removed. So what we're really talking about, I believe, is discrimination. And on some fronts, it might be race, it might be gender, and I'll go into a few things shortly. So I like that in the last conversation, we spoke about the economy, and the real issue is not just our social factors or our biological. It all boils down in many ways to what can you afford? Are you employed? Are you educated? Where do you live? And those are real. If a country is not improving its economy and it's not sharing its wealth amongst the masses, if you've got a wide gap, as we do in South Africa, the widest gap between the rich and the poor, you're going to see a lot more inequality in accessing anything, whether it's healthcare or education. There's political determinants of health. These are the decisions that our governments make that can either protect us or expose us, to certain conditions. An example I like was the closing of alcohol taps, during pandemic. Let's close, let's open, close, open. But that had a big effect on healthcare and the hospitals. Right now those taps are wide open, and trauma is going up and up and up, getting worse and worse, and no one is stopping to say, do we have a problem in this country? We are trying to tackle gender-based violence without thinking, what is the root? What taps can we close physically to improve outcomes? And then geographic, I've spoken about, and then biological is obviously our genetics, our hereditary conditions, and those issues. So as I said, the social determinants of health are actually just about discrimination. And if we live in societies where there isn't equality, there isn't equity, there's a lot of discrimination, someone will always be victimized. My talk is about race, but it can be gender, it can be ethnicity. I come from Limpopo. There aren't enough white people where I come from for us to to have, in any case, I won't mention names in the room, but if you come into our village as a white person, you will be treated, probably like a king. Don't raise hands if you are one of those people, but going to say that our issues there are slightly different because it's more class issues, it's more ethnic issues. I thought we don't have issues until I worked as a doctor in a community that, actually in one of the communities where I grew up, I thought, you know, between veggies, vendors and Shangaan people, you know, I thought those issues are minor, right? But as a doctor, I kept hearing people saying, no, this person is from Zimbabwe, whatnot. And suddenly xenophobia creeped into the hospital, and the discrimination was now based on, you know, which side of the border do you live in, you know? So these are all discrimination issues. People always victimize the person that they think is less important. It's age issues, you know. As a 40-year-old in this room, I've experienced enough discrimination purely because you are too young for these positions that we are advertising for. Why are you so brave to think you can hold such an important position? You know, told, wait your turn, wait till you're 50. You don't have enough gray hair to apply for certain positions. And of course, we know around issues of sexual orientation as well. So I think all of us in this room have either been on one side. It's not true that discrimination only happens to a certain group of people. And I'm saying this because I want us all to be on the same page, that we have all at some point probably been on this side or this side of privilege, and it may not have had to do with race at all. If we're on that page, then we can start working towards how do we rebuild, restore, and bring back the hope that we are missing. The Sustainable Development Goals, again, as healthcare practitioners, we focus on good health and well-being, SDG 3, and we all think if we just focus on healthcare, provide more medications, access to surgery, things will be fine. But nothing is going to be fine because our communities are still poor. Hunger perpetuates, gender inequality, no education. All of those things ultimately mean that our patients are disadvantaged the minute they fall sick, you know. And so even if you're the best doctor in the world, you may not be able to save your patient whose socioeconomic factors have not been addressed or dealt with. So I like this comment, this famous phrase by William Osler. He says it's much more important to know what sort of a patient has a disease than what sort of a disease a patient has. And so we need to think beyond, let's treat, you know, this is diabetes, let's treat diabetes. We have to think, where do our patients come from? Where do they live? What are they facing? And how many more should be with us and are not with us right now? So even the causes of death differ across high-income settings and low-income settings. People die because of lack of access to healthcare. In low-income settings, people die when they are old from lifestyle diseases, behavior choices that they've made in high-income settings. I was part of the African Surgical Outcome Study where we looked at causes of deaths from cesarean sections, and women in Africa were 50 times more likely to die from cesarean section complications than women in high-income countries. This doesn't even have to be extrapolated into race or whatnot. This is just, you know, there's something that is resulting in us having adverse outcomes, and we should compare and look at the reasons. I bring this in because, again, it's not just a healthcare issue. It's Professor Mahmoud Patala put it very nicely, and I think this is not related to women only, and it's not related to healthcare only. It says women are not dying of diseases we can't treat. They are dying because societies have yet to make the decision that their lives are worth saving. If cervical cancer, which is curable, which is preventative, is the leading cause of death in Africa, African women dying because we don't know how to treat the disease, or is it because some amongst us, have not decided that women shouldn't die from diseases that we know how to treat. So of course, South Africa carries a huge legacy of racism. We all know. We know that our hospitals were not necessarily built to provide us with the best care possible. The system was divided along racial lines. There were hospitals for Black people, white people. White doctors could not, Black doctors could not treat white patients. The buildings were not built for the hospitals for Black people. You can see, walk into a hospital that was previously for Black people, you will see the difference between a hospital that was previously built for white people. You know, if you want to see the difference between 5-star and no-star when it comes to hospitals, you know, I was in Malawi not so long ago, and I was in a big hospital, and this hospital really looked like a rural hospital, you know, but I mean, it's advanced. And the medical manager said to me, this hospital, the plan was taken from the South African hospitals, you know, like this was built with South African hospital, with, you know. But what immediately went on in my mind was this was built from a plan from a rural former Black South African hospital. You can see the differences. We're not imagining these things. How much has been done to improve, you know, but what I want to emphasize is that there is a legacy of racism. So it may not be necessarily that, you know, we are dealing with hands-on racism right now and violence right now, but the legacy of racism will continue if we don't address it. I mean, simple things like you walk into a labor ward, there's 10 patients in labor, there are no curtains there. You know, those are issues of dignity. When someone built that hospital, they didn't feel that these women had a right to dignity. And so we come in, we perpetuate all of that, and we're not realizing that we're just perpetuating the racism that was the intent of racism that was there many, many years ago before us. The United States is a classical example of where healthcare and racism is being addressed. This paper published by JAMA on excess mortality and lives lost among Black populations. Again, they compare excess mortality between Black people and white populations, and how in 2020 the numbers have increased from what they were in 1999. So we've got a real problem, and what I like that they say is that there's no real biological reason. It's not a genetic reason. It's a reflection of the disparities that push the risk factors, the social determinants, the limited access, and the structural barriers such as bias. So these things are real, and I thought not to go too much into these case studies. What is also happening right now in America is that people are being silenced for speaking about race. I think one of the universities released this week that they are now banned from speaking about race issues and diversity issues because it's not a comfortable topic, but you can read about that. It's not part of my brief. So the messages I want to bring is there is a legacy of racism. So whether we want to admit to racial determinants or not, the legacy of racism persists amongst us, and it's better for us to address it and to accept it and to work together to change things for the better. And then on inequity, it's highlighting again that because of race, because of discrimination, certain people will not have access to education, to employment, and that further makes them live in a community where they will not access health care. And then race and health. Race remains a complex concept, as I said from the beginning, but there are differences in outcomes, in health status, in life expectancy, and racial groups are not equally affected. And these are the things that we need to address. So race isn't neutral, and race cannot be ignored if we really want to improve the society that we live in. As mentioned, there are certain diseases that may target specific race groups. There are biological reasons, but I think more importantly, there are socioeconomic factors that predispose us to certain diseases. So I've spoken about the patient, I've spoken about diseases, but we're in a university, and so I want to move into just quickly into a few other areas. So the healthcare workers, who's looking after the patients? When you don't have a diverse workforce, it also means that, I mean, just think about the barriers in language, You've got healthcare workers. I'm not saying we must all be fluent in the, in the local language, but we know that there are differences. I worked in Soweto for a long time, and I've got some relatives who live close by. So when a patient came into the labor ward, in my mind, health workforce, I'll speak for health sciences, and we are choosing who we bring in as specialist trainees, who we train as doctors, and allowing the disparities to continue, or the lack of diversity in who we train is also means that certain communities will not be reached. And then, of course, in medicine, I'm happy that the Deputy Dean is here as I talk about this toxic style of teaching, which I believe still happens in many places. I don't know what happens here, but we've allowed toxicity to be a way of teaching in medicine, teaching by bullying, teaching by discrimination, and I think that is actually killing more doctors and patients. If you were to measure, I think, we work in hospitals where everyone is angry, so everyone is abusive, everyone discriminates. But this culture of toxicity is obviously often skewed against the young foreign Black female, because they tend to have the lowest voice in the room, or they are not seen in many places. So we need to break these traditions that normalize unprofessional and sometimes illegal behavior. Then I'll talk about leadership, right? The equity candidate, and where are the Black female deans? Where are the Black female professors? Where are the Black female heads of departments? Are we perpetuating this? Our students have not seen someone of color, someone they relate to, someone that looks like them in a leadership position. And so they are not going to desire to be that person, but they'll also be discriminated against, like I was the minute I raised up my hand, thinking that I might have a good future as a leader in higher education or medicine. So we need to be careful. Of course, I don't know how many of you know this picture. Mm-hmm. This is a Black girl this is a human zoo. This is a Black girl who was being put out there so that the tourists can see Black people. Jesus. And so I often use this picture because sometimes as these equity candidates, this is me, medical school, a picture in Geneva, discussing important healthcare related matters, and you look around, no one looks like you. And how do you feel? So we may address these issues of reform, transform, all of this, but as an individual, where you walk into a room and no one looks like you or speaks like you, it isn't comfortable. So I've spoken about the patient, the teacher, the leader, and the individual, and I'm gonna give some recommendations about how we can address some of these things in higher education. So my key points: race is a biological determinant of health, so we shouldn't throw the race topic out of the room. The legacy of racism is a social determinant of health, and that needs to be addressed. We need a diverse workforce, and we need inclusivity that embraces the full breadth of talent, expertise, perspectives across the sector, whether you're looking at, getting medical students in, or whether you're looking at who becomes a full professor, dean, deputy VC, etc. What does this all mean for higher education? So from a teaching and learning perspective is to ask, are there gaps in our curriculum? Someone realized that most of the pictures in our textbooks are white people. The skin diseases are pictures of white people. That perpetuates this notion that blackness doesn't exist and blackness isn't there. Should we not have diverse pictures reflecting the reality that we live in? How are we teaching? And think about your unconscious bias as well, that if you used to, this is how a clever student responds. When a clever student that doesn't look like you responds, you might not see the cleverness or the brilliance in them just because our minds are programmed in a certain way. How are we selecting students? Are we leaving out students that we should be bringing in because they don't act or look like us or don't come from areas that we traditionally accept students from? Who are the teachers? That's us. We need to look at our diversity across departments, divisions, etc. How many professors do we have by race and by gender? Is there equity in promotions? And then from a research perspective, are we answering these questions? The last thing I ever want to do is to present work like this and just speak about my opinions. This must be data-driven and evidence-based. We had a talk last year on circumcision, and we say so many things about circumcision in South Africa, and comparing traditional circumcision, medical circumcision, and when a guest urologist presented the work, and you were saying no one has published data on this, so it's difficult to actually give an academic talk on this because we all assume we're all talking about this and it's evidence-based, but there is no evidence. So there are topics that are just not being researched, and so we can't even quantify how bad the inequity is. So we need to count as well. We talk about precision medicine, genetics and whatnot, and the geneticists have taken this up, ensuring that there is diversity in what we are, in what is being measured. Are we including vulnerable populations? It's easy to do an M.Med, a master's topic on, maternal deaths in Mowbray, in Cape Town. Who's done research in my village? Who's gonna, if you see this M.Med, maternal deaths in Botlokwa village, Limpopo, you're probably gonna think, is this even, who wants to publish? No one will even want to publish. But we need to change that and start looking at vulnerable populations that really need this and move away from research that is done only in the cities and closer to the tertiary institutions. And then, is our research benefiting those who do not have access to healthcare? I always say some people are getting Nobel Prizes for the work that they've done in Africa, yet people continue to die from those diseases in Africa. From a social responsibility perspective, are we reaching the hard-to-reach and vulnerable populations? What is our talent strategy? Talent strategy, sometimes the talented don't come in the race and shape that we want them to come in. Are we, when we say this is an excellent person with an excellent future, are we open to diversity? And I think both sides as well. I've also found myself, sometimes I'm looking for who's the next Black woman to bring. And I've also had to say, am I looking purely through a race lens, or am I looking broadly at, potential expertise and whatnot? But I think more often our talent strategies do not favor the minorities. When we do outreach programs, where are we going? Coaching and leadership, are we making this accessible to those that need it the most? I think the question came earlier that when you say that there are no people in this discipline, isn't that an opportunity to go and train and develop people in that discipline? So my recommendations is we need to address areas in the curriculum that perpetuate inequity. We need to address inclusivity at all levels in selection and training of students and the appointment and promotion of staff. We need to promote research that improves access to health care for the most vulnerable populations. And we need to promote teaching that is inspiring and inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Maswine, for that wealth of information that you have shared with us. And as it transcends various domains, speaking about structural inequality and the fact that South Africa still has the highest Gini coefficient in the world, and then also going down deeply to the personal. And we really thank you. Thank you so much. Colleagues, so now I'm going to start, just to be inclusive and fair and equitable. I'm going to start with the questions online first this time. Any questions then from colleagues online? Okay. Simnikiwe? Yes. Prof. Maswime, Simnikiwe asks, how many professors do we have by race and gender? Yeah. And how do we ensure that when professionals are selected for the positions, that they come with a transformative and a decolonial mindset, regardless of expertise? We only have one question online, so I'll supplement that with questions from the floor, starting with Cecil.
Thank you, Indra. Thanks, Prof. Just a disclaimer, I think Prof. Ramagondo gave us the assurance. It's a safe space for us to ask questions. So thank you, Prof, for the assurance. I think my question really relates to, or link in with the presentation from Dr. Mkhize. And I think, Prof, you've asked an important question. I think towards the end, you spoke about, we need to be inclusive and we need to be diverse. And the question you ask is, where are the Black deans, the Black professors, and, where do we see them now? How can students relate to those professors and those deans? I want to link that question and to ask if Dr. Mkhize spoke about structural changes, and obviously structural changes might have an impact on policy making and decision making at any employer, not only UCT, but in higher education. Do you perhaps think there is a link between if we transform our structures, that might perhaps have an impact on how we see change in terms of people in senior positions, because policy would obviously influence how we proceed with some of our processes as an institution. And like I said, I'm talking general now, and again, in a safe space. Thanks.
So, would you like to just answer those two? Space?
Yeah, so I want us to first acknowledge we're human beings. We're all here because we want to be here. We are all in UCT because we somehow feel that UCT is the best place for us right now under these circumstances. we're not here because UCT is the highest ranked university. You know, we're here because we feel it provides us the opportunity to teach or to use our talents and our expertise. And so, and the other reason why we stay in our jobs is because of how our jobs make us feel, you know, and we must acknowledge that before we go into the policies and the regulations and whatnot. So when people feel that this place resonates with me, it sees me, it allows me to grow, develop, that I'm happy in this environment, people will come and people will stay, you know. And those are the principles. That's why I use the word, what is our talent strategy? What is our retaining strategy? Because I think we're very quick to create new policies, thinking policies are going to translate into more people and whatnot. But if you're not putting line managers that make people feel like they're welcome, they matter, they make a difference, they can grow, they are on the right trajectory, people are going to leave. So many people I've tried to say, come to Cape Town, come to UCT. My work is in global health. I interact with a lot of people trying to create partnerships for UCT in surgical care. The first thing they said to me when I thought, you know, let's reach out to UCT alumni from other African countries, they said, I didn't enjoy my experience in UCT, and therefore I don't really want to partner with you, you know? And I had to change my strategy to say, we will develop courses where we bring senior students, senior as in, you know, executive students perhaps, to UCT, give them a positive experience, and then they will partner with us for the long run, you know, because people remember how you make them feel at the end of the day. So policy is not going to determine that. So we need to change the culture, you know, if we want to attract a diverse community of talented and experienced people. That was number one, sir. And then number two, how many do we have? I think maybe Prof. Ramukondo, you can share some of the numbers, then I can share my own opinions on it.
Yeah. Yeah, Cecil has the numbers. And Senate members have seen the numbers. But we would hope that deans are taking the numbers to their faculties, and they're taking the numbers seriously to do something about them.
Thanks, Prof. Just perhaps for some context, we submit a report at every Senate minute just to give a breakdown of academic staff. We break it down per academic level, permanent staff and staff on contract, and we also give a breakdown per faculty, permanent staff members. So in terms of the numbers for professors, I think that's the question. At UCT permanent staff members, we've got 3 African females, 11 colored females, we've got 9 Indian females, we've got 49 white females, we've got 5 African females, 5 African males, 16 colored males, 13 Indian males, and then 59 white males. And foreign nationals, we've got 32 females and 66 males. And then there are a few that haven't declared their race or gender. So that's the breakdown at that level. Thanks.
Yeah, and then think about the actual numbers and what people perceive outside, you know, because you look outside and you think this institution is transformed. They've got a black female DVC. You see key positions, you know, and 3 guys, 3 black full South African professors. That's it, you know, like, you know, we've got a problem here, in my opinion. All the hands went up.
Thank you very much. I'm going to I'm going to stay with the questions in the room because I think these are more about the Sustainable Development Goals. So, Tando, your hand was up. Or have we answered
Yes,
it?
thanks.
Would you like to ask your
Yes, please, I do. Prof, thank you very much for that presentation. There was a slide just before your recommendations. And I know in the Western Cape, there was a political formation that advocated very strongly that race is not a biological construct, but a social construct. You assert that it is a biological, and that and then your second bullet talks about the legacy or as a social determinant of health, so to speak. So in a way, I'm curious to understand the positioning of race as a biological, because and I think, and I've said earlier on, I've had my own Damascus experience, and I also wish to have the other form of that Damascus as it relates to race as a biological construct.
Thank you, Tando. And then
thank you. I'm Siwe from Health Sciences. I don't really have a question. I'm just reflecting with you. Thanks, Prof, for the presentation. I teach first years, all first year health sciences, and we have one assignment where we ask them to choose a story that happened in the last 10 years from the current year, where human rights violations led to ill health. What has been fascinating, fascinating is not a nice word, concerning, is that all of the posters I've seen since 2016 up until today, it's that of Black patients, Black hospitals being constantly violated in terms of their humanity, the healthcare that they have. And I just found that very interesting that first years can identify that. And I don't know if we are. That's the first one. The other reflection I had is that I'm glad that the Deputy Dean is here, and everyone, you are also from there, and yourself. So I'm not sure if what I'm going to say is completely accurate, but it's been my own observation. I noticed that the clinical platform across all the different programs that we have in health sciences sends students to Black communities. They learn on Black patients. They collect data on Black patients. They even sometimes in the postgraduate, I'd say, publish data on Black patients, but we don't see some of the changes that you would think if we're getting all of UCTs and Stellenbosch students and UWC going to Black communities, you would think that there would be a change. I just find it interesting that the same, particularly my white students, then immediately after community service, they want to go to private and other countries. So it seems to me that Black bodies are being used as practice to perfect before touching a white person.
Yeah.
That's just reflections.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's just a reflection, you know.
Okay. No, I've got a response.
Well, this is my name. Conflict of interest is my boss. But I would like to declare, at UCT we usually declare conflict of interest. So I would like to say one thing. The information that is passed on, I have been a student leader for the last 8 years, so going through roadmaps for PL, HYBS, and the rest. And the issue I have with the information that we have is it's not passed on to our students, right? Last week, I just happened to have a discussion with the HSSC from Faculty of Health Sciences, and we're discussing the numbers and how there's a problem with the numbers. Because what we see is we communicate with our parents. So the first people that you communicate as you go in the halls, in the hospitals and the rest, are people that look like us, our parents. And the numbers worry us because there's a whole disconnect in the numbers, like we have said. So you see, okay, now at FHS there's one black full-on professor. You're like, okay, happens to be my father. The rest, if you look at the past stuff and the rest, it's so interesting that you have plus minus 658 and the rest, but this is not passed on to us, the students. And like she said, then what do we look up to as the students? Because all the information that we have here is not trickled down to the rest. I doubt the SRC understand what these numbers are and how we can go up. Because we are stakeholders at the university. If a student is a stakeholder, how is this information passed on to them? I only happen to have this information because I sit on all the boards. So do we have this discussion with the first year student in class, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, seventh year that is going to community service? No, is the answer. So what then do we do as an institution? How then do we change if the people that we actually value as students, the information is not passed on to them and the implications therefore of the number? So for me, that's just a reflection that I have. Because I stand here as a student, I do not want to say that I'm a staff member, of which I am. So I would like to stay on the student side because I've been a student all this and it's not passed on. Yeah, so that's just a reflection for that. People that sit up there at the board of governors, I don't want to point at Mama, but this information is not passed on to a first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and the implications thereof. So we just sit there looking at numbers and we think, yes, we're inclusive, but the numbers don't match. And I don't even want to go into who's on class 1 to 5 and 11 as well, because the numbers may make you think that things make sense. I told the HSSC, look here, if someone's COE at the end of the year is less than 12K and they're here with us, what does that mean for you as a black student? And this is your father versus the numbers that we see. And for me, I think these are the discussions that we should actually have with the students. So yeah, that's just my
Thank you so much. Prof, would you like to respond to that?
So as I mentioned from the beginning, I'm here as a healthcare professional, not as a race expert, you know. So for me, in my what I was taught, there are certain diseases that will affect certain groups more, you know. If we deconstruct race and remove it, we deny that there are diseases like sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, you know, ovarian cancer that are specific to certain groups and races and whatnot. So for me, I cannot denounce that there is a biological and genetic or hereditary concept in race that we need to pay attention to as healthcare workers, right? And that's where I'll end it on that one. When it comes to the research that we are doing, we must also ask what type of questions are we asking, right? We've kind of made Africa a playground for descriptive research and you know, I do it myself, so I'm not saying this, but we're not doing discovery research that could potentially change how healthcare is provided, you know, and bringing advances in healthcare. We're doing a lot more research to understand what are our outcomes, what are the groups of people and whatnot. And so that also means that with time we understand our problems more, but we're not solving them. And so I think, yes, we are perhaps experimenting on Black people. Some research, you know, others come from outside to do this discovery research here, but we need to rethink our research agenda in health sciences. That are we doing research that is going to save more lives and improve the health outcomes of are we doing transformative research, you know, and that it's going to transform healthcare in Africa, or are we just asking the most basic questions just so that our students walk away with a degree? My student in another institution many years ago was bold, asking them to ask a very complicated question. And they were told, this is just an MMed, it's not a PhD, please do simple things. And I think that culture continues, it filters through, like why do difficult research if you can do simple, straightforward things? So we need to change that so that our research is actually transformative. And I won't respond because of the conflict of interest.
Can I ask a question? There's a question
I'm
online.
going to respond to Tando's question.
I did that.
Thank you so much. Yes.
So thanks, Prof, for the important segue into FHS. And I'm coming from a context where, in my positionality, we've had to design the dismantling racism strategies. The indicators speak to statistical transformation, but also cultural change shifts. But against that backdrop, we also had the Sutherland program. And the Sutherland program was situated with FHS, and we know from the past that injustices on the black body, on Khoi and San, morphed and gave birth to what FHS is now. And therefore we're complicit as a university, and will continue to be complicit because we benefit from historic research, right? So my question to you is, in some fora, today we have academic research that is, academic freedom rather, that is used as a guise to protect racist research and related behaviors. What more can be done by us in universities to ensure that institutional research ethics processes identify what constitutes racist research?
So it's a difficult one, because for us to start having that conversation, we have to admit that race is an issue, and I think most of these conversations end before they start, because even, submit a protocol to HREC, you'll be told remove race, So therefore now we don't have data on the differences in outcomes. So I think we have to start by acknowledging that there's an important place with race as a determinant of health, as a biological, and then start thinking, what can our research agenda be when it comes to questions that are related to equity? This goes even with gender, right? The pronoun, we are told not to say women now. When we publish about women's issues, you shouldn't say a woman menstruating or a pregnant woman. You should say a person menstruating and a person who is pregnant. So we are completely now removing race doesn't exist, gender doesn't exist, but in the process, we are seeing that this is not benefiting the people that experience the highest discrimination. So we need to have a research dialogue on how do we address some of these issues with honesty and compassion. Like I said at the beginning, this is not to divide us. I want us to be united on issues that we can deal with, but there's a lot going on.
Thank you so much, Prof. Prof, there are quite a few questions online, but we are running out of time. So I just wanted to know, would it be possible for me to pass on the questions to you afterwards to respond to them? But in having said that, I'm going to take one last one just to conclude. And may I just check, are there any questions in the room? Okay, so we're going to just quickly wrap up with two questions before we move to the generative discussions. So the question online, should South African healthcare systems implement its own processes of treating patients, or should we continue to compete at the Western standard of what medical care is? That's the last question that unfortunately we have time to take from online, and then I'm going to take Quentin's question briefly.
Thanks so much, Prof, for your presentation. I just wanted to latch onto the question around research ethics. I think there was an article at Stellenbosch University making some assumptions around coloured women studies, so to speak. My reflections on that is actually one in terms of I almost want to say an interdisciplinary approach. I think there are certain disciplines that are able to position themselves in a particular way to do accurate and ethical research in relation to race. And I think that competency hasn't necessarily been built or established in other disciplines. So I'm wondering what the connection might be to explore what ethical research might look like in terms of race, gender, etc., when disciplines can sit across the table and make sense of what that would look like. And I think there's something to be learned across disciplines, but in our current structure in higher education, I think disciplines don't engage each other enough, and I think there's lessons lost and left on the table as well. Just want to hear what your reflections are on that.
Thank you, and I'll just kind of combine the answer. I mean, you know, from a global health perspective, we always say diseases don't have borders, but health systems do. So the health system in South Africa is different from Zimbabwe, from Zambia, and it's all based on what the current, government at that time decides are their priorities. Is education free? Is it not? Is health free? Is it not? Countries run their own independent health systems. Some, of course, like to mimic what they've seen in high-income countries, but overall, I think we need a fit-for-purpose health system in South Africa. And I know there's a lot of experts in the room and outside in this institution who contribute, but there is, I think, there's a lot that can be done to address the real inequities and the people that are not reached. We make decisions also on evidence, right? So that's the important part with research. But I always ask, whose evidence are we using, right? Sometimes we read papers, studies done in the UK, and then we now want to implement it as is, copy and paste in South Africa, and that tends not to work. So meaning we need more evidence generated here, ethically and properly, that addresses our real needs. Now, the ethics of research across race barriers, my issue is usually with the interpretation, right? So obviously when you do research with gender, with race, with all of these areas of discrimination, you have to be responsible with it. I have seen on other occasions, like I'll read papers from overseas, people who have done research in Africa, and sometimes the data is fine, but it's how they've interpreted it that is completely wrong. So I think it's not just that, the answer is not to say just remove everything that is race related. It's how do we interpret it so that it carries meaning. I'll end off with a joke. They say for every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD. So how we interpret our data is very much dependent on the human being and how they apply their mind to what they are seeing in front of it. Data is not neutral, and data is not, data is not the fact. We take data and we manipulate the data to serve the message that we want to deliver. So, and I think we can all learn how to be responsible with race-related research and support each other across disciplines.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you want to please join me? And then speaking on the point of data, there's also a joke that says, I already wrote the paper, that's why I can't find the right data. For the generative discussion, I was just wondering with DVC, would you also like to join for the generative discussion? Or shall we leave it to the two guest speakers? Colleagues, I will weave in some of the questions online also into the generative discussion. But I want to position this discussion really as for the benefit of the transformation committees, the employment equity committees, the transformation workers, the transformation administrators. that are mandated to implement transformation, diversity, and inclusion within the University of Cape Town, and how we take our work forward. So I'm going to start at the personal level, and then we might only have time to also speak about the structural level, but maybe we can speak about those too. And my first question really is about the personal level work that has to happen. And I'm going to read a quote from Motepalule Natani, who is from BITS, and she is an African woman, Black woman in academia, and she reflects in the following way. Throughout the years, I learned ways to navigate the system. This was not through fighting battles, but through taking my own power back. It was through a mental shift that started in my head and connected to my heart that I reached some internal resolution. The battle I had fought all those years was really a battle against my own internalized oppression. I have since made peace with the fact that we all have different trajectories in life. I know that irrespective of an educational background that did not give me the necessary tools to pave my way into the space, I have worked very hard to be here, and I have resolved that ek gaan nergens. Ek dalk nie, maar ek poela hierso. Because there is significant contribution and a role that I have played and that I will continue to play in the creation and dissemination of knowledge that is inclusive to all. I just want to kind of reflect on that work that has to happen where you reach that point where you say, ek gaan nergens. Ek poela hierso.
Should I start? Yes. I don't know what that means, the transformation.
I think she's reflecting on the fact that she's not going anywhere. She's not leaving academia. That she's here to stay, and that this is the role that she has to play as we dismantle, as we have been tasked to dismantle and rebuild the house, or break down the house or burn down the house. What is the word?
Use the word burn. So I think sometimes you have to put yourself first and your mental health first, you know. I have on other occasions decided to walk out the room even where people expected that I should stay and fight the good fight, because I decided this fight is no longer for me. It's either I will be the sacrifice if I keep fighting. So it's important that we decide as women which fight we want to fight. But having said that, I still say it's the people. There are institutions that I left because of the people that did not believe in me, and there are institutions that I came to because of the people that believed in me and continued to support. And I'm very clear that, you know, when I see that support is gone and I can no longer thrive in an institution, I will walk. You know, that's my standpoint, because I invested too. I invested so much time thinking at some point someone is going to believe in me and see me beyond my skin color and my age and my shape and all of that. And so I think it's important that we are reflective when we stay. Don't stay just because, you know, it's the right thing to do. You know, there are too many casualties. So that is my honest reflection. Don't become a casualty.
I think with my reflection, and I've said this before as to, I honestly thank and appreciate my parents that I played tennis at such a young age, and that I was the only Black person everywhere, regardless of girl or boy, playing tennis in a white sport. So I developed a thick skin very quickly. And the issue was I was very good as well. So that was also another thing. And I remember my father said to me, he said, by the time you walk onto their tennis court, they've already undermined you. So you then need to perform at your best, because wherever they look at you, you're nothing to them. You playing tennis, what is that? So when you beat them, it's a lot. I mean, of course, taking a loss, but then being beaten by a black person as well. That is something else. So then when I brought that into my academic profession as well, as to I was actually, when I started transformation, I used to think that what I was told, people need to transform, we need to transform space. When you have a black woman, it's transformed. But then as I've learned as to, it's not about what people look like, because there are white people who actually are for transformation. And we live in South Africa where we have to live with each other and unite regardless of race. So then what happens in a situation where you have a person who's a black woman who's sabotaging other black women, but a white man who's there encouraging and pushing black women to be in these spaces, to be nurtured, supported, and thrive. So then I just realized, okay, so it's not about the identity, it's about you as a personal individual. How do you want to push transformation? That actually should be what should be the criteria, is what have you done for transformation? Not what you look like is transformative. What have you actually done to push the agenda forward? And I guess with you, Prof. Somebody, you're saying that if you in an institution that isn't for you, you just want to leave. To me, I'm the opposite. Is when you show me you don't want me here, I'm not going anywhere. Anywhere.
I'm just saying, nowhere to leave.
Yes.
Because you find you've spent 10 years trying to be accepted in a place that might never accept you. But don't go.
Thank you so much for sharing generously, Hamdi. And then I guess at the relational level, how is it that we still are experiencing racialized patriarchy? And how might we do, what might we do differently today, tomorrow, next week, next month, in dismantling oppression that comes from people who look like us sometimes, and people who look like us but that are different gender to us. And how might we respond as an individual and also as transformation committee workers? How might we respond?
So the question is, there's what we say, there's what we do, right? And in your in your division, department, whatever, committee, are we really ready to transform? Okay, let's put aside what we say, because we tend to say the right things. I've said in meetings where I knew that this committee is not ready for transformation. It's not. Because what everyone is saying does not say transformation, but someone at the end summarizes and says, we are pushing for transformation. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, how ready is UCT for transformation, and what does transformation really mean for UCT? And that is a personal reflection that we must all have. Don't raise any hands, but ask yourself in your own space and these transformation processes that we are part of as a team. Are we really ready for it? You know, because transformation comes with sacrifices, right? You know, some of the people that I know that have been responsible for the most transformation are not black. You know, sometimes they are white males. They are, you know, but often it has been someone who is willing to be the sacrifice and say, I am going to step down from this position, from my position of influence and authority, so that the right person can step into this job and this position, right? And too often that is, no one is really willing for that to happen. So we find often we are ready to say the right thing, but no one is willing to make the sacrifices that are truly required for transformation to be real.
how do I follow that? It was great. But I think for me, I think, as you were saying, Andre, as to what do we do in situations where people are supposed to be transformative and they're not, I think call it out. I think we honestly, as South Africans, we don't want to say certain things or have these uncomfortable conversations because we're both Black. But then if there's a situation here, we need to call it out as to, you're supposed to be here to support me, nurture me, encourage me, but you are the very person preventing me from progressing. So what is that? Because then you can't say, oh, it's racism because you're both Black, but it's something. It's clearly something. So then those are the uncomfortable conversations, and we have to have them. And if we're going to be sincere about wanting to be transformative and have a better society, better academic life for everyone, we have to have these uncomfortable conversations and really get down to the root as to what is the issue. Because we can't say, as you say, race is no longer an issue. If we're both Black in the room, if we're both women, then what is the actual issue?
Thank you very, very much. I suppose it also touches on the internalized oppression, and we don't know how to humanize each other. We've lost the ability to humanize. So then then we're going to move on to the structural domain and what might difference look like today, tomorrow, next month. So how might the institution and faculties assist with creating more room to engage with the complexities of race, especially in research? That's a question from Roshan Galvan.
So I just want to add from a leadership perspective, you can't take people where they're not ready to go. You know, so often in leadership, we think we hold the power and we can move an institution from this place to that place, and you quickly get humbled to see that people were not ready to go in that direction. So it's important that as we think about research leadership, whatever leadership in the different spheres, whilst pushing for transformation, you need a collective drive to move in that direction. Can we answer the question?
I get what you're saying about how do we get there if we're not ready to get there, right? So that's why for me, I think race and even gender is important. If we're going to say there's no race, there's no gender, as you were saying, that it's a person who menstruates, a person who is pregnant, but they're still woman. I mean, it's actual woman. So what is wrong with saying the word woman? Because it's woman. But so how then do you go to a community where they don't have that lexicon? You know, I can't say man, I can't say woman, I have to say person. And yet you're trying to do research, you're trying to do data, it makes things very complicated for them. So I think more education and getting people ready so we can actually move to where we want to move is the better way to go.
Thank you. I just want to touch then on the state of not readiness. And I want to reflect on 29 years into democracy. How might we still not be ready? And what will it take to be ready? And then how might we realize that we will all perish should we not be ready very quickly? And then TVC says you don't have to reflect on that. And then I will definitely follow up with the questions that are still online. So in that way, I'm going from my side, I deeply, sincerely thank you. And then I'm going to hand over to the host conversation.
Thank you, Andre. I was just worried that we might start losing people, and without having given opportunity to really thank you and do so, appropriately. And you know, sometimes you attend engagements and then you have closing remarks, and then you ask yourself, was I the same event? Because it looks like the one closing is writing their own paper. So really, I mean, just so much richness you've given us here. That point about how to reach communities. I met a young man, brilliant young man from Langa the other day. And what he shared with me was absolutely heart-wrenching. Because it is not that we can't reach communities. The communities have become unreachable because we have failed them. And they don't trust us. So the work that repairs that damage is wasted. And I'm glad to say he's at the center of doing that work. He's young, a student. So when we talk about social responsiveness, and we forget that we have young people from Google to like Siwa over there, right? And we don't see them as a resource to make sure that we never find that communities become hard to reach. We're never gonna win. And win for humanity is over. And those communities will never be invested in these institutions. Really something to think about. The naming is so critical. I mean, you've made it so poignant. And there is that German philosopher, I forgot the name. If you don't name it, it doesn't exist.
And
you have to ask, we all have to ask ourselves, why do they not want us to name? And who are they? Yeah? Because censorship has beneficiaries. There are people who benefit from censorship. So whenever someone says, don't say it, don't name it, look at who they are. And look particularly for their handlers. What is also brilliant about this engagement is that we have two faculties, health sciences, humanities. The fragmentation of the knowledge project is such an disservice for humanity. Because here we are able to look at issues, but ultimately come to well-being. Human health, right? And we look at these things from the perspectives, where we allocated the disciplines. Important to speak from within and without, outside of the disciplines. What is clear is that racism is less about relational engagements and more about systemic and structural engagements. And we're often scared to go there, right? It's both. I mean, of course, it's still about relational, but if we don't engage the structural, we're never going to be able to handle relational. And, I always think of this analogy. Someone has their boot, a heavy boot on your toes. It hurts like hell. But they tell you it's going to be okay. They're not removing the boot. Of course, it's going to end in tears. Because at some point, you are going to throw the heaviest fist you can throw. Because you want to survive. If you don't fight back, you will continue hurting. So there's work to be done. I mean, on the outcomes and the race, and the outcomes of racism as ill health. Genocidal, right? I mean, when you think about Zandile's story, thank you for bringing that story in the room, Sayan. I mean, imagine you are in her shoes. Yeah. I mean, the support that young must have had to pull through is amazing. It could have ended by it. Right? Another story is our national story, is around this alcohol. Why do people drink so much in this country? There's a reason. Don't blame the alcohol. And part of it is economic, right? Because if you look at the price of bread compared to the price of beer, you'll be surprised which one between these two is cheaper. Who benefits from intoxicating our people? benefits. Someone does benefit. But we also are intoxicating ourselves because we are not okay. Self-medication. When I end with this contest, it's almost like attention, right? This visibility, blackness, visible. But it's not enough. And there are words by Kwame Ture, where he says black visibility is not black power. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just before we exit, Andres has a few words.
Thank you, BBC. Just before we exit, we just want to show you a token of our appreciation. The journey we've been on since last year. We really thank you for leaving some wisdom, meaningful change that we can implement in our sphere of influence. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon further. And to DDC. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for the vision for this conversation. We thank you. Thank you, colleagues online as well. Thank you to our sign language interpreter, Michelle. Thank you.
Very good.